I lost my job on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday night, my parents had invited the entire family to a Sunday dinner. They said it was to support me, but I knew the truth. They wanted a front row seat to watch me fall. What they didn't know was that I owned the house they were standing in, and I was about to teach them the most expensive lesson of their lives. The email came at 9:47 on a Tuesday morning. I remember the time because I had just poured my first coffee, just sat down at my desk, just started scrolling through the usual Tuesday nonsense when a new message popped up from HR. We regret to inform you that your position has been eliminated effective immediately. Your access has been disabled. Please return your laptop and badge to the office by Friday. Just like that. 8 years of work, 8 years of late nights and missed weekends and projects that went nowhere while my boss took the credit, 8 years of showing up and grinding and pretending I believed in the mission, erased by a form letter that probably took 30 seconds to write. I sat at my desk for a long time, not crying, not panicking, just staring at the screen, waiting for something to feel different. But I felt nothing, just empty, just tired. By the time I packed my things and walked out, it was already afternoon. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 2 hours before I could drive home. Not because I was sad, because I was trying to figure out how to tell my parents. Trying to figure out how to survive their pity, their judgment, their quiet satisfaction that I had finally failed like they always expected. My mother called that evening. She always had a sixth sense for disaster. Probably smelled it in the air, the way sharks smell blood. "We heard," she said. "No hello, no how are you, just those two words, flat and cold and dripping with something that might have been satisfaction. Your cousin works in HR, she told us everything." I closed my eyes and leaned against the kitchen counter. "Mom, I was going to call you. I just needed a minute to—" "Don't bother explaining. We've already made plans. Sunday dinner, 6 o'clock. The whole family wants to see you." See me. Not support me, not help me. See me. Like a car crash, like a circus act, like the failure they always knew I would become. "Mom, I really don't think I'm up for—" "Be there," she said, and the line went dead. I stood in my dark apartment, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to silence. They knew. Of course they knew. And instead of calling to check on me, instead of asking if I needed help, they planned a dinner, a viewing, a chance for the whole family to gather and watch me disappointed up close. My parents never believed in me, not once in 34 years. Every job I took, every risk I made, every time I tried something new and scary and exciting, they were there with their sighs and their sideways looks. "When will you settle down? When will you get a real job? Your cousin just bought a house. Your sister got promoted. What have you done?" I stopped telling them about my life years ago, stopped sharing my wins, my progress, my quiet successes, because every time I did, they found a way to dim it, to make it feel small, to remind me that in their eyes, I would never be enough. So I kept my secrets. I kept them close and safe where no one could touch them. And one of those secrets was about to change everything. 3 years ago, my parents hit a rough patch. My father's business took a hit, my mother's hours got cut, they fell behind on the mortgage, and the banks started sending those letters with red ink and threatening language. They were going to lose the house. The house I grew up in, the backyard where I learned to ride a bike, the kitchen where my mother taught me to cook, the porch where my father sat and read the newspaper every Sunday morning. They didn't tell me, of course, they wouldn't dream of asking me for help, but my sister called, panicked, and told me everything. I didn't think twice. I had been saving for years, living small, investing smart, building something they knew nothing about. I had enough, more than enough. I bought the house. Not through some complicated trust or anonymous LLC. I just called the bank, made an offer, and paid cash. The bank didn't care who the money came from as long as it cleared. My parents never asked. They never wondered. They never once considered that the daughter they dismissed could be the one saving them. Now they were planning a dinner, a celebration of my failure, a chance for the whole family to gather and watch me squirm. I looked around my apartment, at the nice furniture they had never seen, at the art on the walls they would never understand, at the life I had built without their help, without their approval, without them at all. Sunday was coming, and they had no idea what I was bringing to dinner.
Sunday arrived cold and gray, the kind of day that makes you want to stay in bed with the curtains drawn. I stood in my closet for 20 minutes, staring at my clothes, trying to decide what message I wanted to send. Something expensive but detail, something casual but confident, something that screamed, "I don't need you," without actually screaming. I settled on a simple black sweater and dark jeans. Nothing flashy, nothing that would make them suspicious, just clean, comfortable, quietly expensive. The kind of outfit that whispers money instead of shouting it. The drive to my parents' house took 45 minutes. I spent the whole time rehearsing scenarios in my head, what I would say, how I would say it, the exact moment I would drop the truth and watch their faces change. But when I pulled up to the house, my hands were shaking. The house looked the same as always. White colonial with black shutters, well-maintained lawn, American flag by the front door, my father's car in the driveway, and 3 others I didn't recognize. The whole family, just like my mother promised. I sat in my car for a long moment, engine running, heater blowing warm air against the cold. Through the front window, I could see shapes moving inside. Laughter drifted out, muffled and distant. They were already having a good time, already celebrating before I even walked through the door. I thought about turning around, driving home, texting some excuse about being sick, but then I thought about my mother's voice on the phone, that flat, satisfied tone, the way she said, "The whole family wants to see you," like she was announcing a public execution. I turned off the engine and walked to the door. My aunt answered. She smiled, but her eyes were hungry, scanning my face for signs of devastation. "There you are. We were starting to think you weren't coming." Wouldn't that have been nice? I thought, but I just smiled back and stepped inside. The living room was packed. Aunts and uncles and cousins and family friends, all holding drinks and plates of food, all turning to look at me as I walked in. The room went quiet for just a second, just long enough for me to feel the weight of every pair of eyes. Then the noise resumed, louder and more forced than before, people talking over each other, pretending they hadn't just been staring. My mother emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She looked me up and down the way she always did, taking in my clothes, my hair, my face, looking for cracks, looking for weakness. "There you are," she said. No hug, no warmth, just those 2 words, flat and cold. "Hi, Mom." She gestured toward the living room. "Everyone's here. Your cousin brought his new girlfriend. Your aunt made that casserole you used to like. Go say hello." Like I was a guest in my own hometown, like I didn't belong here any more than the cousin's new girlfriend. I moved through the room, exchanging polite hugs and forced smiles. My aunt patted my hand and said, "Don't worry, honey, something'll turn up." My uncle clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Tough break, kid. Let me know if you need help with your resume." My cousin's girlfriend looked at me with wide, sympathetic eyes and said nothing, which was somehow worse. Everyone knew. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone was ready with their pity and their advice and their quiet satisfaction that it wasn't them standing here, unemployed and exposed. My father found me by the kitchen door. He was holding a beer, his 3rd or 4th, judging by the looseness in his stance. He looked at me the same way my mother had, searching for the cracks. "Well," he said, "here you are." "Here I am." He took a long pull from his bottle. "You'll figure it out. You always do." It was the closest thing to support he had ever given me, and it landed like a slap, because I knew what he really meant. You always figure it out eventually, but look at you now. Look how far you've fallen. Dinner was served at 7. The dining table was extended with both leaves, covered with dishes and platters and bowls of food that nobody really wanted. I was seated near the middle, surrounded by relatives who talked over me and around me, never to me. My mother sat at one end of the table, my father at the other. the king and queen of their little kingdom, holding court over their subjects. Halfway through the meal, my father stood up and tapped his glass with a fork. The table went quiet. "I want to say a few words," he announced, "about family, about sticking together when times are hard." He looked around the table, making eye contact with everyone except me. "We've all had our struggles. We've all faced setbacks. The important thing is how we handle them, how we pick ourselves up and keep going." Nods around the table, murmurs of agreement. He finally looked at me. "And I know our girl here is going through a rough patch right now. Lost her job, 8 years down the drain, but she's young, she's healthy, she'll figure something out." The table murmured agreement. My aunt reached over to squeeze my hand. "She might even move back home for a while," my mother added, her voice bright and cruel. "Save some money, get back on her feet. Nothing wrong with that." The table laughed. A few people nodded, agreeing that this was the natural order of things. The daughter who failed, retreating to her parents' basement, shrinking back into the child they always thought she was. I sat perfectly still. My hands were under the table, folded in my lap, and they did not shake. "Is that what you think?" I asked quietly. My mother frowned. "What?" "Is that what you think should happen, that I should move back home, curl up in my old bedroom, and disappear?" The silence was absolute. You could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. You could hear people breathing. My mother's mouth opened and closed like a fish. My father gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. "This house," I continued, my voice calm and steady, "the one you're standing in, the one you just suggested I move back into like a charity case, belongs to me. I own it. I've owned it for 3 years. And you never knew because you never bothered to ask. You never bothered to wonder who saved you. You just assumed it was a miracle, a stroke of luck, a generous stranger." I folded the deed and slipped it back into my pocket. "So no, Mom, I won't be moving back home, because this isn't your home anymore. It's mine, and I'm still deciding whether I want to let you stay." I picked up my purse and walked toward the door. The room stayed frozen behind me, 20 people too stunned to move or speak. At the door, I paused and looked back. My mother was still standing at the head of the table, face pale, hands shaking. My father hadn't moved at all. "Enjoy the rest of your dinner," I said. "I'll be in touch about the lease." The door closed behind me. The cold air hit my face like a blessing. I walked to my car, got in, and sat for a moment in the dark, letting my heart slow down. Then I started the engine and drove home, to my apartment, to the life I had built without them. And I didn't look back. The week after that dinner was the quietest of my life. My phone stayed silent. No calls from my mother, no texts from my father, no desperate messages from aunts or cousins begging me to reconsider. Just nothing. Complete radio silence. At first, I thought they were processing, giving themselves time to absorb what had happened. But by day 4, I realized the truth. They weren't processing, they were waiting. Waiting for me to crack. Waiting for me to call and apologize. Waiting for me to admit that I had gone too far, that the daughter who owned their house would eventually crumble and beg for forgiveness. They didn't know me at all. On day 8, my brother showed up at my apartment. He stood in the hallway, hands in his pockets, looking older than I remembered. Dark circles under his eyes, a tension in his jaw that hadn't been there before. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside and let him pass. He walked to my living room window and stood there, staring out at the city, not saying anything. I waited. Finally, he turned around. "Mom hasn't eaten in 3 days. Dad won't talk to anyone. The whole family is falling apart." I sat down on my couch. "And you came here to tell me this why?" "Because you're the only one who can fix it." I almost laughed. Almost. Fix it? I didn't break anything. I just told the truth. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "Maya, I get it, okay? I get why you did it. They've been awful to you for years. The dinner was cruel. Mom shouldn't have said what she said. But this is our family. You can't just—"
I can't just what? I can't just own the house they live in? I can't just remind them that I'm not the failure they always believed I was? I can't just protect myself from people who have spent my entire life tearing me down? He didn't answer. He just stood there, looking at me with something that might have been understanding or might have been pity. I couldn't tell anymore. Do you know what it felt like, walking into that house, knowing everyone was there to watch me fail, knowing my own parents had planned a dinner just to humiliate me in front of everyone I know? He shook his head. It wasn't like that. They were trying to enjoy my suffering. I stood up, facing him, and they would have succeeded if I hadn't had that deed in my pocket, if I hadn't spent years building something in secret, something they couldn't touch. I would be broken right now. I would be exactly what they wanted me to be. My brother was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked the question I had been waiting for. Is it true about the house? I nodded. Every word. He sat down heavily on the edge of my couch. How? How did you afford it? You were making, what, 60,000 a year? I was making 80, I corrected, and I've been saving since I was 22, living small, investing smart, taking risks they would never understand. I sat down across from him. I bought the house 3 years ago when the bank was about to foreclose, paid cash. The bank didn't care where the money came from. They just wanted it off their books. He stared at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was a stranger to this family for years, and they were only now noticing. What happens now? He asked. I don't know yet. Are you going to kick them out? The question hung in the air between us, heavy, unavoidable. I thought about it. Thought about my mother, standing in that kitchen, wiping her hands on that dish towel. Thought about my father, holding his beer, looking at me with that familiar disappointment. Thought about all the years of sideways comments and dismissive sighs and quiet cruelty dressed up as concern. I could do it. I could hand them an eviction notice and watch them scramble, watch them finally understand what it felt like to be powerless. But I also thought about something else. I thought about the backyard where I learned to ride a bike, the kitchen where my mother taught me to cook, the porch where my father sat with his newspaper every Sunday morning. The house wasn't just theirs, it was mine too. It held my memories, my childhood, my history. No, I said finally, I'm not going to kick them out. My brother's shoulders sagged with relief. But I'm not going to pretend nothing happened either. I stood up and walked to my desk, pulled out a folder. I had my lawyer draw up a lease, standard terms, fair market rent. They can stay as long as they want, as long as they pay on time and treat me with basic human decency. I handed it to him. Tell them they have until the end of the month to decide. He took it, but didn't open it. You're really going to make them pay rent in their own house? It's not their house anymore, I said quietly. It's mine, and it's time they learned that respect isn't free. 2 weeks later, I got a text from my mother, just 4 words. We'll sign the lease. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The message was enough. They had accepted the new reality. They had finally understood that I wasn't the failure they always believed I was. I drove to the house that Sunday, not for dinner, for paperwork. I pulled up to the curb and sat in my car, looking at the white colonial with the black shutters, the American flag by the front door, the well-maintained lawn. My father met me at the door. He looked older, smaller. The confidence that had always defined him was gone, replaced by something quieter, something that might have been shame. He handed me the signed lease without a word. I checked the signature, folded it, and put it in my bag. Your mother wants to know if you're staying for dinner. His voice was rough. I looked past him, into the living room. I could see her in the kitchen, moving slowly, deliberately, preparing food the way she always had, the way she did when I was a child, and the world made sense. No, I said, not today. He nodded like he expected that. But maybe next time. If you're both ready to have a real conversation, not about the house, not about money, about us. Something flickered in his eyes. something that might have been hope or might have been regret. I couldn't tell anymore. I turned and walked back to my car, started the engine, pulled away from the curb. In my rearview mirror, I watched the house shrink and fade, my parents standing on the porch, side by side, watching me go. I didn't know if we would ever be a real family. I didn't know if trust could be rebuilt after years of damage and one explosive night. But for the first time, the door was open. Not on their terms, not on mine, just open. And that was enough for now.